Hi folks, we are here at the Avery Nature Preserve in Quaker Hill, Connecticut, and today we're planning to hike on one of the main nature trails that's been laid out here. This area is very special for me because the Avery name here actually refers to my grandparents, George and Virginia Avery, who donated a large portion of land to make this nature preserve possible. I was actually here a long time ago when I was a kid. We would be visiting my grandparents, and my grandfather would frequently take us on nature hikes in this very same area. But I haven't been here in more than 25 years, so this will be special for me and a sort of a trip down memory lane. And in this video, we invite you to join us as we explore this special area.
As I mentioned, the Avery Nature Preserve is located in Quaker Hill, Connecticut. You might be thinking, where's Quaker Hill, Connecticut? Well, if we start with a map of Connecticut here and zoom into the southeast corner, we can find Quaker Hill, which is a small community just north of New London, Connecticut. And within Quaker Hill, the Avery Nature Preserve is located on the east side and very close to the Thames River. And at this point, I do want to bring up something that can be confusing. If we look at the area across the river, we see that there are actually two other nature preserves with the name Avery in the title. These are not related to the Avery Nature Preserve in Quaker Hill. My family was not connected to the land in these preserves, and to the best of my knowledge, it is purely a coincidence that another Avery family or families were connected to nature preserves so close by. Granted that it is a very interesting coincidence, but it is a coincidence nonetheless. Now let's zoom in even further on the Avery Nature Preserve. Note that I have drawn a rough outline of the borders of the preserve, and let's switch to the satellite view. One thing that is good to know is that the easiest way to access the preserve is via Scotch Cap Road. And one quick way to find the entrance is to type in 61 Scotch Cap Road into a map application. Here I typed 61 Scotch Cap Road into the Google Map application. 61 Scotch Cap Road is actually the address of a vacant lot that is directly across the street from the entrance to the Avery Nature Preserve. Note that if I now engage Google's Street View function and place the little guy on the street right in front of the vacant lot, I am placed right in front of the Avery Preserve entrance sign. Note that there's plenty of parking on the right or the left of the entrance sign, and this staircase leads into the preserve. But being on Scotch Cap Road here brings back fond memories for me. This was the road my grandparents, George and Virginia Avery, lived on, and their story is intricately linked to the history of this preserve. So at this point, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the preserve. But if you just want to see the exploration of the preserve, you can simply skip ahead to this point in the video. So I just want to talk for a minute about how my grandparents came to acquire a great deal of land in this area. Back in the 1930s, my grandfather, Dr. George S. Avery, joined the faculty at Connecticut College and became a professor of botany. During his time there, he was instrumental in establishing the Connecticut College Arboretum on a large parcel of land owned by the college. He became its first director. I love this photo of him standing at the top of the Arboretum entrance. Note that this entrance is still there today. As I mentioned, my grandfather was a botany professor. He was also a naturalist. He was fascinated by all things natural, especially plants and trees. I believe it was his love of nature that drew him to purchase land in the local Connecticut area. When my grandparents initially arrived in the Connecticut area,
They lived in Groton, Connecticut. This was where my mother and uncle grew up. In the late 1930s, however, my grandfather got interested in old farmland that was somewhat close to the college in nearby Quaker Hill. For him, the appealing aspect about the land was that it was undeveloped and had numerous natural areas. He began purchasing various lots, piece by piece. By the early 1940s, my grandparents had become the owners of close to 100 acres in the area marked in red here. After purchasing this land, my grandparents decided to build a house they would live in on the newly purchased land. They wanted a house that would be somewhat isolated in a natural setting, and so work began on building a house on Scotch Cap Road. Note that one goal in placing the house was to keep it back from the road in a wooded area. This goal was accomplished. Here we see the location of the house and how it is back from the road. And if you are on the road, you can't see it from the road. All you can see is the driveway entrance. And as you can see in this video, the driveway was fairly long and led up to the house that was tucked away in a nice natural area. This helped foster an ambience of living in the woods. When the house was completed in 1945, the whole family moved into their nice new home. For my grandfather, an important goal had been fulfilled. When he wasn't working, he could now retreat to a house in a wooded area that all belonged to him. This was a great way for him to expand on his interests in all things natural. Interestingly, it was also around this time that my grandfather took a job as director of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden in New York City. While this new job was a great opportunity for him and a very prestigious role, it did require him to be in New York City 5 days a week. I believe this new job situation presented an interesting dilemma for my grandparents. Did this mean that they would have to give up this new Connecticut house and move to New York City? Well, that is not how my grandparents solved this problem. Instead, they simply lived in two places. During the week, when my grandfather had to be at the Botanic Garden, they lived in an apartment in Brooklyn Heights. And on the weekends and holidays, they lived in their new Connecticut home. Problem solved. And then, after my grandfather's retirement from the Botanic Garden in 1969, they gave up the Brooklyn apartment and lived full-time in their Connecticut home. In this photo, we see my grandparents entertaining friends in 1976. They resided in their Connecticut home for the remainder of their lives. And this brings us back to the Avery Nature Preserve. As an avid nature lover, my grandfather was a fervent believer in land and nature conservation. He was very much a proponent of protecting land and keeping it from getting developed. In keeping with this goal, my grandparents did a very generous thing. In 1978, they donated a parcel of land that was approximately 30 acres in size to an organization called the Waterford Land Trust. Now you may be thinking, what's the Waterford Land Trust? Well, the Waterford Land Trust is an organization that is local to Quaker Hill and other nearby towns, and they are dedicated to land and nature conservation. Their conservation goals and those of my grandfather dovetailed nicely. Back then, and still today, their mission is concerned with preserving natural areas throughout the community. They work to acquire properties in the local area for the purposes of maintaining the natural charm of undeveloped land. And so, during my grandparents' lifetime, the Waterford Land Trust, or the WLT as they call themselves, became the owners of about 30 acres of my grandparents' land. And then, during the 1990s, both of my grandparents passed away. It was very sad to lose them, but both of them lived into their 90s, and it was gratifying to know that they both had led full and productive lives. Their memory remains strong in my family, carried forward in the lessons they shared and the warmth they brought to those around them.
Now, after my grandparents passed away, the remainder of my grandparents' land passed to members of my family. And in 2001, the WLT worked with my family to purchase another parcel of land from my grandparents' original land. This parcel was also approximately 30 acres in size. After acquiring the second parcel, the WLT combined the two parcels into a 64-acre nature preserve, which they named the Avery Nature Preserve. The WLT provides a certain level of maintenance of the preserve and makes it available to the public for hiking and various types of nature-related exploration. Within their general website, there is a page devoted to the Avery Nature Preserve that provides some general information. One nice feature included on this webpage is a link to a detailed map of the preserve. This map is great as it shows you how you can access the preserve and provides trail navigation information. One thing to note on this map is that my grandparents' original house is not part of the preserve. The house and some of the surrounding land were sold as a private residence. The house is still there though. Here is a recent photo of it that I found on a real estate website. Okay, now that I have covered the history and background of the preserve, we can return to our exploration hike. Note that on the day we were there, we were able to park on Scotch Cap Road just in front of the sign. There was another car there as well. So let's get started. Let's climb these stairs and start hiking. Note that I am joined today by my son Stephen and my wife Karen. One thing to keep in mind early on here is that we must walk along a somewhat narrow passage before we get to a much wider area. Now, one thing that you notice right away about this land is that it is easy to walk through. It is not a dense forest by any means. It is easy to leave the path if you want to take a look at something in more detail. Speaking of looking at things in more detail, the WLT's website describes some of the preserve's plant and tree highlights. I am not a plant and tree expert like my grandfather was, but my understanding is that you can see extensive mats of rock polypody, which is a fern, dense stands of mountain laurel, magnificent beech trees, although I understand that the beech trees have, unfortunately, contracted a serious beech leaf disease, a beautiful fern glen, and a stand of mature sassafras. In addition, some of the trees at the start of the main trail are helpfully labeled. Now, after walking along the narrow passage, you enter a much larger area. One thing to look for is the main trail. Note that the main trail is marked by red dots like this one. These red dots are great because they help you stay on the correct trail. Note that sometimes these red dots can be hard to see. Now, another thing to pay attention to in this area is that the main trail actually goes to the left and to the right. This is because the main trail loops, as you can see on the map here. When we got to this point, we chose to go rightward towards the Thames River. As we got near the river, we decided to take a short detour from the path to walk down and get a closer look at the river. I remember doing this with my grandfather years ago. One thing you notice right away are the railroad tracks. I remember these from when I was a kid. My understanding is that these tracks belong to the New England Central Railroad and are still active. These tracks run from the New London area and go all the way to the Canadian border in Vermont. I remember very well that my brother and I would often find discarded railroad spikes and keep them as souvenirs. Now, when you are standing in this area, one thing you can see is the Naval Submarine Base that is located across the river in Groton, Connecticut. When we were there that day, we were able to spot a submarine in the water docked at the base. One interesting thing to note is that this particular subbase has been there for more than 100 years. It was actually built in 1915. After our short detour, we resumed our hike on the main trail. One interesting thing that you notice in the Avery Nature Preserve is the huge prevalence of rocks in all kinds of shapes and sizes. In this video clip, you can see a particularly large number of various rocks, some of which are embedded in the ground and others just lying on top of the ground. In addition to large rocky areas like this, you can also see a fair number of stone fences throughout the entire preserve. You may be thinking, why are there so many rocks in this area? Well, it turns out that there is a very interesting explanation for why rocks are so plentiful in this area and why there are so many stone fences. This explanation revolves around glaciers that made their way into this area during the last ice age. The last ice age started around 85,000 years ago and finished up about 10,000 years ago. During that time, large glaciers flowed from the north and made their way southward, enveloping northern areas all over the globe. New England was one such area covered in glaciers. Note that the entire state of Connecticut is included here and was completely covered. One interesting aspect about these glaciers is that on their way southward, they engaged in what is called glacial plucking. Glacial plucking refers to the forward motion of glaciers literally ripping away fragments of bedrock from northern territories and carrying these fragments southward. These fragments are called glacial till and consist of various sizes and shapes of rocks, from fine clay to large boulders. When the glaciers eventually melted, they left behind countless tons of glacial till scattered all over areas like New England. And this explains why you can see so many rocks in this area. Rocks can be found everywhere you look. And this prevalence of rocks proved to be a back-breaking challenge for colonial New England farmers. In order to farm the land in this area, they needed to remove countless rocks and stones in order to make the land farmable and productive. When the rocks were removed, they often piled them into fences to delineate property lines and contain livestock. This practice of clearing the land and piling the stones into fences explains the widespread abundance of stone fences in the New England area. It is estimated that there are around 240,000 miles of stone fences scattered throughout the New England landscape. That means that there is enough of these fences to go around the world nearly 10 times. And the Avery Nature Preserve has its fair share of these fences. During our hike, we saw quite a few of them. What's interesting about this is that it makes you realize that during colonial times, the farmland in the Avery Nature Preserve may have looked something like the landscape here that is depicted in this image. After hiking along the eastern portion of the trail, we made it to the far side of the preserve where the trail bears left, and we started walking westward. And just past the halfway point of the main trail, the path led us onto a gravel road. We followed this road for a short time, as I knew that we would approach the other entrance to the preserve, and I wanted to see what that was like. We found the other entrance here. Note that it has a sign just like the Scotch Cap Road entrance. This entrance can be accessed by turning onto this gravel road from Route 32. One thing to note, however, is that I have heard that this gravel entrance can be a little hard to find. And, as I mentioned earlier, I believe the Scotch Cap Road entrance is the best way to access the preserve. After passing the entrance sign, the main trail heads south. Now, a real highlight along this part of the trail is a huge boulder that I remember so well from when I was a kid. My grandfather called this the Great Rock, and when I was growing up, it was always a thrill to go on a hike and view this enormous rock. Over the years, it was a popular spot to take photos. For example, here I am on top of the rock in 1985. Yes, I used to be able to climb rocks like this in 1985. Here is a photo of my Uncle Bill, also from 1985. Note that he is holding his hand up to give a perspective on how tall this rock really is. And here's a picture of George Avery himself, standing in front of the Great Rock in 1975. In his hand, he is holding pruning shears. Whenever he used to hike around the property, he was constantly clipping small branches in an effort to keep the paths clear and unobstructed. And so, this Great Rock is definitely a highlight of the Avery Nature Preserve. And in reading about the preserve, I have learned that the technical name for this boulder is Glacial Erratic. Glacial erratics are similar to glacial till, except that they more often refer to really large boulders that have been transported by glaciers and placed erratically, or randomly, in another location. The key characteristic is that their particular geologic composition is different from the typical geologic composition of where they are placed. In this diagram example, note that a sandstone boulder has been deposited on top of a bed of limestone. Note that in keeping up with family traditions, we each had our photo taken next to the boulder that day. Moving on from the boulder, we soon came upon this cleared area that I also remember very well from when I was a kid. This cleared area used to be a small Christmas tree farm. During the 1970s, my uncle and his family worked with my grandfather to clear some space and plant Christmas trees. Soon after, they started a small Christmas tree business during the holiday season where customers could walk out to this area and pick out a live tree. This became a holiday tradition from my grandparents' property and went on for a few years. Now, it is a little sad to see that any trees remaining are greatly diminished and dying. But it is heartening to know that this land is recycling itself and going back to nature. Soon after passing the Christmas tree clearing, we found ourselves back at the point where we had started on the main trail. And if we look at the map here, we can see where these most recent points of interest are located. After passing the gravel road entrance, we viewed the boulder here, the Christmas tree clearing here, and found ourselves back at the end of the narrow passage here. We then walked back to our van, and at this point, we had come full circle and finished exploring the Avery Nature Preserve. In total, we had covered about 1.6 miles. All in all, it was a very easy and pleasant hike through the woods. And of course, for me, it was a very special trip down memory lane. If you are in this area and interested in a nature hike, I do recommend checking out this preserve. And hopefully, this video has provided you with some background information about the area that will enhance your understanding of what you are looking at in the Avery Nature Preserve. Thanks for watching.